All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. I've tried to record this video multiple times. I probably spent hours trying to record this stupid video. I know I have. I know I've spent at least 10 hours trying to record this video. I keep having to record it for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being that I keep discovering new things and that I'm in fact wrong, so I might as well, redo the video over again. All right, so I'm going to start off this video assuming that my audience is rather familiar with the game Battle Brothers. Battle Brothers is easily one of my I think it's one of the best turn-based strategy games I've ever played, to be perfectly honest with you. And I'm tickled pink by a bunch of the mechanics, especially with like the different weapon mechanics in a medieval setting. Yada yada yada. But the whole reason why I'm making this video is I watched all the guides online and I listened to all the tier lists, and I found that a number of things that people say about certain things are in my assessment incorrect. And I wanted to make this video debunking a bunch of like incorrect information that is out there about Battle Brothers. So if I had to make a list, right? The first thing that bothered me is that in starting Origins, the Peasant Militia company Origin start is usually ranked like middle tier when mathematically, and the reason they give for this is that it has a rough start, which it does. But once you know what to buy and what not to buy and what fights to take early game, she doesn't really have a rough start anymore. But power level wise, the Peasant Militia company Origin probably is easily the most powerful Origin in the entire game. The only one that even comes close to my knowledge in power level is like Anatomist, but that's just because with Anatomist you can get, rather than having 2 mega tanks on your flanks, you have like 2 lone wolves, two-handed swordsmen, lone wolves on your flanks, which is kind of disgusting, or axes for that matter. But yeah, so I'm kind of a little butthurt that the militia company starting Origin is considered middle tier. It should not be considered middle tier, but we'll talk about that when we get there. The other thing that really bothered me is in the weapon tier list. So in the weapon tier list, the Qatal Dagger is usually put really, really high, and often people say things like, this weapon is insane, it does tons of damage, it's broken, I don't know why it's not nerfed yet. If you understand the underlying mechanics of the game and you understand math, you'll find out really, really fast why the Qatal Dagger is not actually broken and is actually pretty decently well balanced for the game as a whole. So we'll talk about that when we talk about that. The Nobel Sword is also pretty mid-tier on the list. Like, people often ask in Battle Brothers why you don't use spears or why you don't use Nobel Swords, specifically one-handed swords, late game. And the common response is that you'll literally, I'm doing air quotes over here, is that you don't do enough damage and you'll be quickly enough and you'll be overwhelmed because of it. It might be the fact that I'm playing Peasant Militia, but this is an experience that I think mathematically and based upon my actual experiences with the game just does not hold up to scrutiny like at all. So just so we're clear, this is day 109 with this Peasant Militia Origin. You can see I've got 16 brothers here. I got a massive front line of Dagger Mastery Qatal Daggers. And then I got a very interesting and unique backline, let's just say, of Throwing Axemen. If I could have 6 Throwing Axemen available, I would have 6 Throwing Axemen in the back rank and a banner, but, it is what it is for now. So yeah, I have some experience playing the game. I'm not going to show you how many hours I've been playing the game, but yeah, I've got some experience playing the game. I think I played the game maybe like 500 hours or something like that, which is not a lot, but it's enough for me to be like, yo, dog, let's talk. All right, so those are the things I really wanted to talk about in the grand scheme of things. I'm gonna start off this video assuming you know quite a bit about Battle Brothers, assuming you know what a Zero-Stam build is, assuming you know what the meta build is, and I'm going to start explaining why weapons like Qatal Daggers are not that overpowered, but you can make them overpowered with like throwing axes. And I'm going to also talk about possible other one-handed weapon builds like Nobel Swords and so forth and so on. Then I'll finally get into the meta of comparing, say, sword and board builds versus what is considered to be more meta build, which is two-handed axes with like Zero-Stam brother builds. Okay, so let's start off with some mechanics that you may or may not be familiar with. Let's start off with the armor mechanic. So the armor mechanics are really weird, and I actually had to stare at this stupid thing for quite some time and play test and check some things online before I really started understanding what the hell is actually going on here. So if the example they give here on Battle Brothers Wiki is to be believed, when you see a weapon that says, give this to me. When you see a weapon that says something like ignores 30% or 30% of damage ignores armor, or like a two-handed axe will say 40% of damage ignores armor, blah, 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 blah. Like if I come over here and we look at this poleaxe, the poleaxe says 30% of damage ignores armor, 110% effective damage against armor. This is actually an incorrect statement. What it really should say is plus 30% damage ignores armor, not 30% of damage ignores armor. And you can see that very clearly here in this wiki formula, because they tell you that it'll do between 90 and 135 damage to armor. Its base damage is 60 to 90, but it does 150% damage to armor. So when we multiply this by 150%, we get this number right here, right? 90 to 235. But then it's like this weapon rolled out of this damage variance 120, but it also got 27 HP damage. Okay, well, that means that this number is not a percentage of this number. This number was a separate roll for like additional damage, because it says over here that it does between 60 to 90 damage, and 30% of it ignores armor, which is 18 to 27, which of course is 30% of these two figures over here. So it's not it's not X percentage of this weapon's damage ignores armor. It is plus X percent of this weapon's damage ignores armor. All right, we cool with that? All right, sweet. What's also interesting with that mechanic is you can see it very clearly in the Duelist. So if you read the Duelist perk, the Duelist perk says become one with your weapon and go for the weak spots with the offhand, free, or carrying a throwable weapon. An additional plus 25% of any damage ignores armor. Does not work with two-handed weapons. So this one is actually written correctly, where it's like, you know, plus 25% of any damage. So you really should think of these numbers like not only is it a separate die roll, which I find interesting, but it's actually an additional plus 30% of weapon damage ignores armor. All right, so that's the first interesting interaction to take note of. Then the second interesting interaction to take note of is there's actually a damage reduction on this bonus penetration armor damage. That is 10% of the current remaining armor. So if there's an enemy that has like 300 armor and you bitch slap them for like 100 damage, you do like 100 damage to the armor, and then like you did 40 damage of 40 HP damage of penetration damage on top of that, the armor still has 200 armor remaining, and then 10% of that will be reduced from that magical bonus HP penetration damage, right? So rather than doing 40 of that penetration damage, it'll be 40 minus 20 penetration damage. And you can see that right here in the formula. So they do 120 damage to a 300 HP kettle helm. So there's 180 armor remaining on the kettle helm. The Orc Warrior, this 27 damage right here is the 27 bonus penetration damage that they rolled, 18 out of 27. But this minus 18 here is happening because 10% of 180 is 18. And then it takes, which means the Orc Warrior would take 9 damage, HP damage, despite still having, 180 armor left on their helmet. This times 1.5 sounds weird, But if you read the actual formula up here, it says if critically hit, everything is multiplied by 1.5. Hits to the head actually do critical hits in Battle Brothers. So a hit to the head will do plus 50% damage and plus 50% HP damage. Is that true? Yeah. I guess it's only plus 50% HP damage. It's not plus 50% armor damage now that I'm looking at it. So I'm still learning things as we go here, right? Which is why this got multiplied by 1.5 times in the end. If you have Steel Brow, it'll knock that completely off of the equation, so there will be no bonus plus 50% HP damage for getting smacked in the head. Okay, cool. So what does this mean in the grand scheme of things? Let me take a drink of water here. It means that weapons like Qatal Daggers and Nobel Swords, unless the enemy's until the enemy's armor value starts dropping below 100, or to around-ish about 100, this bonus armor pen damage just isn't really going to take effect. So Qatal Daggers, for example, do between 6 to 9 penetration damage. But if the enemy has like 100 armor left over, it's just going to reduce that by 10, so it's not actually going to do anything. Noble Swords also have almost no armor penetration bonus damage either. They have like 20%, so it's not really going to do anything. Some weapons, like the long axe over here, they say they do 30% bonus armor penetration damage, and they do like 110% armor damage. That bonus damage of penetration armor isn't really going to come into play until your enemy starts dropping below like about 150 to maybe 200-ish armor. So weapons like great axes, which are considered to be the meta weapon. Let's go see a great axe really fast here. Their 40% armor pen and their 150% bonus damage to armor means that they will get armor through pretty damn quickly. And we can see that over here when I actually look at the damn formulas. So you can see that versus a 300 armored target, a great axe, a GA, let's zoom in on this. A great axe, a GA, will do on average about 135 damage to armor, and will do on average about 20 HP damage to the target, like 19.5 HP damage to the target. And that's after the target reduces it by 16.5, which is how much armor is reduced after getting smacked by a great axe on a 300 armored target. This number, of course, changes a bit once the enemy starts getting like 200 armor. Rather than it being minus 16 at that point, it's probably only going to be minus like, let me think. It'll be like minus 7. So the damage will start going up a bit as the target gets lower and lower armor. But then the question becomes, what the hell happens when it has no armor whatsoever? And when the target has no armor whatsoever, rather than doing like 160 damage to the enemy, a great axe suddenly just does its like base damage, which is like 90 damage. And that's basically the story of the great axe, where it does tons of damage to a target when they have armor, and then they do more and more damage to the target as the armor gets lower and lower. But if the target has no armor whatsoever, it just does 90 damage a hit. It's Qatal Dagger and Noble Swords are the complete inverse of this, right? They're the polar opposite of that. So our Qatal Dagger versus a no armor target is doing like 112.5 damage a turn if it's allowed to stab 3 times. I think I have it over here. Noble Swords are basically doing like 95 damage if they're allowed to attack twice, stationary. So both the Qatal Dagger and the Noble Sword end up doing more damage than the Great Axe versus unarmored targets. I'm not sure if that penetration damage, bonus penetration damage, also applies to an unarmored target. I really should get up off my butt and stab something and see if it actually does more damage than normal versus an unarmored target. In fact, I will get off my butt and go do that right now. But let's go. Yeah, I'll just tell it to attack the Barbarian King, and we'll get this on. I don't know if my my recording will actually record this. Many Barbarian Reavers. Hopefully we do more than 16. Hopefully we get to fight the camp too as well. Nope, just 16 guys. All right, well, I'm going to end the turn. I'm going to let these unholds come on over here, and we'll stab it and see what's going on with that. But the important thing to note here is that the Qatal Dagger is basically the complete opposite. Same thing with the Noble Sword. So that's the first thing to point out, is that the armor mechanics in Battle Brothers are kind of interesting. I'm not done talking about the armor mechanics, though. There's more stuff to talk about with it. But so for example, these Battle Brothers here, they all have Qatal Daggers. They all have Dagger Mastery, so they can attack 3 times, and they all have Fearsome. But until the enemy armor drops below 100 armor, I'm not going to see any Fearsome procs with these Qatal Daggers, because I'm not doing any actual HP damage to the enemy. Now, this army gets around this by having a backline of, like, up to 6 throwing axemen, because throwing axes are incredibly good at shredding armor off the enemy. So you just end up doing something like, these guys are stunned, so I guess I target this unhold here. So you end up doing something like throwing axes at the enemy to completely negate the armor. Or I'll use the axes to lower the armor down to a point where the Qatal Daggers can start doing their damn job, and Fearsome procs can actually start doing its job. So I would like chuck a dagger at this guy. Okay, fine, his armor is plenty lowered. This guy's armor is plenty lowered. And I just get around this problem by having a backline of bros that are designed to strip off the armor, and then the Qatal Dagger can basically go Super Saiyan against unarmored targets. I'll bitch slap this guy really faster. I really want these daggers to go. I don't care about any of these guys over here. Yeah, I'll throw it at this guy. Doesn't really matter. Just end turn. I don't care. I legitimately don't care. But if I attack this guy, let's just see what happens. So that did do a Fearsome proc. Let's see. Stab. We did 31 damage to his armor, and we hit the body for 3. Obviously, he's below 100 armor, if that's 31 damage to armor right there. And yeah, so Fearsome's just going to do its job, and of course the Qatal Dagger is being terrifying. So we hit the animal hide for 28 damage, and then we hit the body for 30 damage, so that's a low roll. So it went, interesting. So I'm not actually learning anything off that brother there. I literally don't care. Just go away. I literally don't care. Just go away. I just want to attack this damn unhold. Okay. If I move here and I stab this guy once, I want to see what the damage is. It's still 30 damage. I don't like that. Well, my weapon does between 30 to 45 damage, right? So I want to see it do more than 30 fucking damage. Stab this guy, see what happens. Yeah, so he still had a little bit of armor left. So rather than doing 40 damage or whatever it would normally be, wait, no, that's not true. Oh no, we hit him in the head. Okay, so we actually did bleed through some damage. Okay, so I hit his body for 30 damage and he suffers a shoulder injury. Okay, 43, thank God. It rolled higher than normal. But I don't know what the interaction of the weapon is when the armor's on the threshold. So if they have 20 armor left and I hit them for 40 damage, how exactly does that mechanically work? What I do know is that when the enemy still has armor available to them, these Qatal Daggers on average will hit for 26 damage, which is really bad considering versus unarmored targets they'll hit for 37.5 damage, but we'll get into that in a second. Can I please attack this effing unhold? Where did he go? I don't care anymore. Just, can I attack an unhold? Please, can I attack an unhold? That would be nice. So nobody gets to attack an unhold this turn. Thank you. Fuck off. The last brother. Awesome. So this guy has no damage. What we want to know here is, can we see it do more than 45 damage? And I think the answer is no. So I think because there's no armor whatsoever anymore, that quote-unquote bonus armor damage from armor penetration just isn't in the game anymore. I think that's literally how it works. But I'll keep an eye out for that. Jesus, that pissed me off. All right, load. It made me angry because it's like 30, 30, 30, and I'm like, is my game broken? What is this shit? We do 30 to 35 damage. What the hell is happening? So yeah, so I think that's how it works. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Right. So the other thing to talk about here, and this is going to be super important, is percentages. Okay? So let's go look at a couple different weapons here really fast. Let's look at a Noble Sword. All right? So we're going to look at a Noble Sword, and we're going to look at a Qatal Dagger. Okay? Noble Swords do 20% bonus damage armor penetration, but if the target doesn't have armor, that apparently goes away, as near as I can tell. But it does 85% damage against armor, okay? Now, what I want to really describe here is a scenario about math where going below 100% in damage to armor is not the same as going above 100% damage in armor. And we're going to showcase that mathematically really fast here. This 85% damage to armor means that this weapon does something stupid like 25% less damage to armor than if it did 100% damage to armor. Okay? If this weapon said, like, how do I even describe this? Let's do a theoretical. All right, let me take a drink of water, do a theoretical. Let's say this weapon did only 50% damage to armor, right? What that would mean is that this weapon does half damage versus armor. It also means that if I was able to increase the damage to the armor of this weapon by plus 50%, I would be gaining plus 100% damage. So if this weapon did 100% damage to armor, and I got it to do 150% damage to armor, that's only plus 50% damage to armor. But if this weapon did 50% damage to armor, and I did plus 50% damage to the armor, that's plus 100% damage. It's because of how damage reduction percentages work. Basically, damage reduction or percent-based damage above 100% is linear in scaling, whereas it's exponentially scaling once it drops below 100%. Those are the correct terms to it, but, I mean... So basically what this means is that legendary Noble Swords... Let's talk legendary Noble Swords for a second. Legendary normal Noble Swords will do 85% damage to armor. A legendary Noble Sword can at best do like, I think it's like 115% damage to armor. What you need to realize is that 15% over the 100% mark is plus 15% damage, but that plus 15% damage to the 85% below the 100% damage mark is a plus 25% increase to damage. Basically what this means is that in Battle Brothers, you're really looking for weapons to do at least 100% damage to armor. And when they start dropping below 100% damage to armor, that's really, really bad. It doesn't get really bad until it starts dropping below 90% damage to armor, but anything below 90% damage to armor gets really, really bad. All right, so let's just show some math really fast here. Blah, 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 blah. So if I do 90% damage to armor and I got a weapon that suddenly does a plus 10% damage to armor, what this means is that this 90% damage to armor weapon has increased by about 11%. Okay. Yeah, you can see it right there. So I take the 90% damage to armor, I increase it by 11%. Congratulations, we're now at 100% weapon damage. So you can see that it's not that bad. If a weapon is doing 100% damage to armor, that's great. If a weapon is doing 90% damage to armor, that's fine. It's only an 11% damage reduction from what it could be at 100%. But then if I look at like 85% damage to armor, which is what this Noble Sword is, I think I have to multiply this by like 20% around about there. 85 times 1.19. Yeah. So it's almost a 20% decrease, or it's almost a 20% increase in damage for this thing to go from 85% armor pen for it to go to 100% armor pen. And of course, if you get your hands on a legendary Noble Sword, without exception, it's going to be 100% armor penetration or higher, which is perfect because at let's say you get one that's like 110% armor penetration. That means when you're swinging against armored targets compared to your basic bitch Noble Sword, the thing is going to be doing 18.5 plus 10% more damage to armor. It's going to be doing a whopping 28% increased damage to armor, which is monstrous and huge and awesome and great, right? So this is one of the things that makes Noble Swords really good, is that even though they only do 85% damage to armor at the beginning, if you get your hands on a bunch of legendary Noble Swords, which you can get pretty easily from doing the arena tournaments and save scumming and actually knowing what you're doing, Noble Swords end up becoming probably one of the better one-handed weapons in the actual game. On top of the fact that one-handed swords, have plus 10% chance to hit things, blah 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 blah. One of the other better one-handed cleavers. Let's look up a military cleaver. Military cleavers are kind of in the same boat. So military cleavers are a weapon that does 95% damage against armor, which is awesome. We already talked about how anywhere between 100% to 90% is really where you want to be with your one-handed weapons. Once this thing gets legendary, it'll definitely get over 100%, which is great. Its armor penetration is relatively bad, but it's still a really great weapon versus unarmored targets because of all its bleeding capabilities, making cleavers in the game a really, really good one-handed weapon. It's more dynamic than that in Battle Brothers because you have to talk. The first thing to talk about is what does the weapon damage look like when your brother doesn't have to move. Then you have to talk about what does the damage of your battle brother look like when he has to move around. And then finally you need to talk about what does the damage look like of your battle brother when they are basically stamina starved, if that makes sense. When they're at 0 stamina and they're living and fighting with only plus 15 stamina regeneration a turn. Okay? The reason why I bring all this up is let's look at a Qatal Dagger really fast here. All right, cool. So Qatal Daggers are fascinating because they can attack 3 times. They do 30 to 45 damage. Their special attack is low stamina and does even more damage. But the thing that really makes the Qatal Dagger stand out in Battle Brothers, be it a good thing or a bad thing, is that horrifyingly bad 70% effective against armor. 70% effective against armor. To give you an idea of the value of bringing this weapon up to 100% armor penetration or even 90% armor penetration is, I think this is like a 50% reduction in damage. It's like a 45% reduction in damage. Okay, so if I take 70% and I I increase that by 45%, you can see we're getting close to like 100%. So 70 times 1.44 equals, yeah, we're getting there. 70 times 1.43, okay, cool. Yeah, 43%. All right, so this weapon versus armor is basically doing 43% less damage than if it had 43% less damage. Is that how I want to do that terminology? Maybe I don't want to do that terminology. It's clearly doing 30% less damage, but you have to realize that going from 70% damage to 100% to armor to 100% armor would increase this weapon's damage output by a whopping 43%. Right? There's 2 ways to look at it. You can look at it at a 30% damage reduction, or you can actually break out a calculator and actually look at the math and realize that this actually makes this weapon incredibly bad versus armor. We can kind of see that over here. So, for example, the Qatal Dagger versus an armored target, even at attacking 3 times a turn, is only doing 78 damage versus an armored target. But once the target has no armor, it basically goes Super Saiyan because there's nothing holding it back anymore, and it becomes one of the highest damaging one-handed weapons versus a non-armor target in the entire game. I've also have this down here, which is like mobile DPS, mobile swords versus not mobile swords. And so this here is a verse. Let's zoom in on that really fast here. This is a versus armor scenario, and these slashes are you moving hexes or not? What does life look like? So you can see we have the Qatal Dagger here at 78 damage if it's allowed to stay stationary and attack 3 times versus an armored target, versus a Great Axe, which will do like 160 damage under those same circumstances, even though it only attacks once. If the Qatal Dagger is forced to move a single hex, it'll do 52 damage instead of 78. Whereas the Great Axe, of course, will still do 160 damage to the target. If the Great Axe is forced to move, if it needs to attack something even further away, then 2 hexes, because it moves 1 hex and then attacks 1 hex away. If it needs to attack something 3 hexes away, it'll quick hands into a pole axe and bitch slap it with a pole axe instead, causing 91 damage to armor. And I think this is pole axes have a reach of 2. So yeah. So this is I'm stationary damage. This is I moved 1 hex and I bitch slapped you. This is I moved 1 hex and I swapped into a pole axe and I attacked 2 away. So I guess this needs to be deleted. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. I'll have to think about it, right? But what we can see here is that the Great Axe, which is considered to be like 0 stamina build, Great Axe, quick hands into a pole axe, which is the meta build for Battle Brothers, not only does it do amazing DPS versus armored targets, but it does amazing DPS while also in a mobile state as well. It can move around and maintain a large quantity of its DPS at all times, which is something you can't really say for the one-handed weapons. Noble Swords, and this would work for military cleavers and stuff as well. If they're allowed to stay stationary, they do decent DPS, like the 80 DPS is not half bad. But if they're forced to move, their DPS basically gets cut in half, and that'll happen for up to 2 hexes. And if they're forced to move for more than 2 hexes, they do no DPS whatsoever for that turn. The Qatal Dagger is a little bit of a different story because she can at least attack 2 times after moving 1 hex. So it'll do noticeably more DPS moving 1 hex away, but if it's forced to move 2 hexes, you only get to stab once, so it does significantly less damage than the Noble Sword. And the DPS between a Noble Sword versus armored target and a Qatal Dagger attacking... the Noble Sword attacks twice. The Qatal Dagger attacks 3 times. The Noble Sword still actually does more damage, and this isn't even taking into account the fact that the Noble Sword has like plus 10% chance to hit the target, right? That being said, Qatal Dagger, their special move, does lots of extra damage, blah, 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 blah. It basically means that Noble Swords are pretty damn competitive to the Qatal Dagger when it comes to mobile DPS and stationary DPS versus armored targets, which in my opinion makes the Qatal Dagger like not broken, right? Again, that was one of the things that bothered me, is that people will put the Qatal Dagger like really, really high up on the weapon tier lists, and that's not really a thing until you start using the special attack of the Qatal Dagger, which gets like plus 33% extra damage, and on top of that, you're like you're dual wielding it, so it gets a plus 25% damage bonus as well. And then on top of that, it's like duelist dual wielding, so you get that extra plus 25%, like, armor penetration damage. At that point, the Qatal Dagger starts becoming really, really good, but that requires an awful lot of setup and for you to not be wearing a shield. And if you're not going to be wearing a shield, why the hell are you not using a Great Axe? Starts becoming the real question, right? So over here in these brackets, we have the situation if you get your hands on like a legendary Noble Sword or like a legendary Qatal Dagger. The legendary Noble Sword is basically assuming that your legendary Noble Sword, because again, it can range anywhere from being its normal 85% armor penetration to like having 115% armor penetration. Or so this is just assuming that your Noble Sword is now at least 100% armor penetration. Or conversely, the target has no armor whatsoever. You can see its stationary DPS goes up to 95, not that big of an increase over 80, but still noticeable. Its mobile DPS also goes up a considerable amount. It just becomes a better weapon in a more well-rounded, better weapon in general for a one-handed weapon. You can see the Qatal Dagger starts becoming even better. If she's allowed to get anywhere, I think this Qatal Dagger was recorded at 85% armor penetration. So she went from 70% armor pen to 85% armor pen, and you end up with like 96, 64, 32. But these two weapons just end up having like a different kind of life cycle to each other, or different kind of combat flavor flav. Because again, Qatal Dagger can move one and do considerably more damage than the Noble Sword. But once you need to move 2 hexes, it actually does worse than the Noble Sword in both categories. And then standing stationary against armored targets, they do almost identical. Whether they, they do almost identical. It should be noted that the Qatal Dagger's armor penetration for legendary weapons will vary from its normal 70% all the way up to 100% armor penetration. And when a Qatal Dagger has 100% armor pen, it's just like GG's at that point, because she'll just run around doing she'll like do 120 DPS, which stationary, and it's just terrifying at that point. Legendary Qatal Daggers, people do talk about how legendary Qatal Daggers are overpowered and amazing weapons in Battle Brothers. That I 100% agree with. But I don't agree with the fact that the Qatal Dagger is an amazing weapon just in general. You really need to know how to use her. Like, again, with this army, the whole idea is Peasant Militia, there's a backline of throwing axes. Throwing axes do 115% damage to armor, but they only have 25% armor pen. So they're really, really good against armor, but they're not very good against low armor or no armored targets. If you look at the javelins, they have 45% bonus armor penetration damage, but they only do 80% damage to unarmored targets, which means the javelins are amazing for low armored targets and for no armored targets. But since I have a bunch of Qatal Daggers here, this is where the synergy comes in, right? The 6-ish throwing axemen that are supposed to be in this army, their job is to shred the enemy's armor so that the Qatal Daggers can basically go Super Saiyan, right? Just get the enemy armor to around about 100-ish, and suddenly the Qatal Dagger and the fearsome perks will start doing their damn job. So that's how you get that synergy there. But this army could just as easily have a bunch of Noble Swords here and pretty much be just as effective, right? Yeah, so that's the one thing that you really need to think about when you think about one-handed weapons is it's the fact that if the weapon says it does 90% damage versus armor, that's pretty good. If it says it does 100% damage to armor, that's really good. If it says it's doing more than 100% damage versus armor, that's good, right? It's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. If it's saying it does 80% damage to armor, 70% damage to armor, that is atrocious. Those are really, really bad numbers. So because of how damage reduction works, once it starts dropping below 90%, effectively happens. So basically, TLDR here is that the Noble Sword is actually a really good weapon. I'm gonna keep talking about Noble Swords here in a bit. So Noble Swords are actually really good. When you get a legendary Noble Sword, they become extremely good because they start. It's almost guaranteed it's going to have 100% armor penetration, which is pretty much. It's definitely over 90% armor penetration. So at that point, Noble Swords start becoming amazing one-handed weapons in Battle Brothers. Military Cleavers, for all the reasons we talked about, also kind of fit that bill. This is my assessment of Battle Brothers, at least, because you have a weapon that baseline has 90% effective against armor. When you get a legendary one, of course, it's going to go above 100%, which is awesome. But even once you, so she's really good against armor, and then once the armor isn't there anymore, it's a fucking cleaver, which means you're going to cause bleed damage out the ass. So it's also, military cleavers are probably one of the best well-rounded one-handed weapon in the entire game. That this is, of course, we haven't taken into account stamina issues yet, but we'll get there, right? If you don't factor in stamina, military cleaver is one of the best one-handed weapons in the game. I think it's called fighting axe. Fighting axes are also one of the best weapons in the entire game if you're not taking into account stamina, because they don't do good against unarmored targets, but with 30% penetration of additional penetration damage, 130% damage versus armor, this thing is way better versus armor than a Noble Sword is, way better versus armor than a Qatal Dagger is, but this thing will get throttled by stamina very, very quickly. Same with the military cleaver, but that's a tale for later on in this video. Spears. Now, this is one assessment that I do agree with. Let's go with, is it fighting spear? I think so, yeah. So, again, one of the problems that bothered me and one of the reasons why I'm making this video is I looked up guides online and people would say things like, why don't you use spears endgame? Why don't you use Noble Swords endgame? And then the statement that's coming back in a lot of those videos is, you just don't do enough damage and you'll get overwhelmed. The spear is almost the perfect weapon if you look at it, because she does come with 100% armor penetration, right? Great. The downside to the spear, however, is that her base damage is pretty low at 35 to 40. That's pretty bad. Actually, that's not just pretty bad, that's really bad. Qatal Daggers, it's the same amount of damage as a Qatal Dagger, and this thing can only attack twice, and it will eventually be stamina throttled. But really what sets the spear back is the fact that spears have plus 20% chance to hit the target. Noble swords have plus 10% chance to hit the target, or swords in general. And then the Qatal Dagger doesn't have anything going on except it gets to attack 3 effing times if you're standing still, and 2 times if you're moving once, right? And then Cleavers do bleed damage, and then everybody else does additional weird things, but those are the most notable side effects. Plus 20% chance to hit your target is amazing early and mid-game when your brothers are still not max level. But once your brother is max level, he can't really make use of all that bonus attack damage anymore. So it basically just gets wasted, and you're just left with a weapon that just doesn't do enough damage. So I agree completely that spears kind of suck that they don't do enough damage, but I'm gonna have to do some pushback on the fact that Noble Swords and Sword Mastery and Qatal Daggers are somehow bad. But we'll get there when we get there. The Qatal Dagger just works if you back it up with Throwing Axemen. A normal army can't really support that very well because they only have 12 brothers, but once you start doing Peasant Militia, you have a front line of nine brothers, and you have a back line of like up to 6 Throwing Axemen and a banner. Yeah, your back line's just going to shred armor, and then your Qatal Daggers are just going to do their damn job, and you end up with this really scary wombo combo. But you could just as easily have a front line full of Noble Swords for reasons I'm about to talk about right now. So let's talk about the last thing. So we talked about how weapons work versus armor, and how the Qatal Dagger is actually really bad against armor, and it's actually Super Saiyan against unarmored targets. I talked about how you can kind of get some synergy going with your Throwing Axemen to really bring the most out of your Qatal Daggers. The last thing to talk about here is stamina throttling, and we did cover a little bit about what mobile DPS looks like. So two-handed great axes, especially if you get to quick hands into a pole axe, is amazing raw DPS versus anything that has armor. Versus unarmored targets, you would prefer to have Qatal Daggers and Dagger Mastery. You would even prefer to have Noble Swords. because you just end up doing like 90 damage in attack to an unarmored target. And that's basically this. The Qatal Daggers will do even more damage. Noble Swords will do slightly more damage than that, than a two-handed axe versus an unarmored target. What else is there to say? But the thing the great axes do amazingly well is they're incredibly mobile while maintaining a high amount of DPS. Whereas the only other brother that is mobile while maintaining even remotely a high amount of DPS is the Qatal Dagger build. But because if you look at the Noble Sword here, right, the sheer act of needing to move causes their DPS to get cut in half. Whereas having to move for the Great Axe, literally their DPS doesn't change at all for the first hex you move, and then for the second hex you move, that's like 2/3, I think, or maybe that's it goes down noticeably, but I mean you're still swinging. It's still noticeably more damage than like 40 you're going to get with a Noble Sword or 28 you're going to get with a Qatal Dagger. This is really good game design, people. This is good game design because what it means is, depending upon what weapons you equip your brothers with, you're going to have a different combat experience. You're going to have different challenges. Different armies are going to be a threat to you versus not a threat to you. So, for example, there aren't a lot of fights in the game where it's versus unarmored targets that have high HP. The only fights I can really think of that are like that are unholds, which can have up to like 600 HP, and they'll regenerate like 10% of their HP a turn, which is disgusting. They have almost no armor, and they have like a ton of HP. And the other fight I can think of is orcs. All orcs have like 200 HP, but the really scary orcs are the orc warriors who have like, they have like 300. They can come around with like 300-ish armor. Hell, the example they give here is an orc warrior with 300 armor to the head, and it probably also has like 200 plus armor to the body. And on top of that, once you get through all that armor, it still has 200 HP, right? So when fighting orcs, the Great Axe is amazing against the armor, but once the armor is gone, the Great Axe is kind of like no better than a Qatal Dagger. At that point, conversely, the Qatal Dagger is terrible against the heavily armored orc, but once the orc runs out of armor, the Qatal Dagger goes Super Saiyan and just kind of rips him to pieces. Yeah, and then you got the Noble Sword just sitting there like, I don't care if it has armor, doesn't have armor. I mean, it just is what it is. I kind of just do damage. just this well-rounded weapon, one way or the other. Roger that. However, the elephant in the room, of course, here is... What am I trying to say here? Oh, yeah. Okay, so the next thing to talk about is the stamina throttling. All right? So, let's just do this really fast. Let's go look at some swords. All right? So, how stamina works in Battle Brothers is every turn your battle brother has 9 action points to work with, and can regenerate 15 stamina a turn every single turn in Battle Brothers, okay? The reason why the meta build, the zero stamina, two-handed axe, great axe brother is so amazing, I can actually go to town here really fast and buy a great axe, believe it or not. So we're going to buy up this great axe, and I think I want to buy a military cleaver as well while we're at it. Do I want to buy that? Do I want to look at anything else? I don't think so. I think we're good with these two weapons here really fast. All right, cool. So let's get this gigantic two-handed axe on this brother really fast. All right, sweet. So the meta build in Battle Brothers is often known as a Zero-Stam brother, but a Zero-Stam brother is a brother that's going to be wearing 300 armor. So they're going to have like a full helm. They're going to have like a coat of scales. So they have 300 armor on the helmet, 300 armor on the chest piece. And then they're wielding a giant F-off great axe. And what's awesome about this brother is that if we look at the attack of this weapon, it costs 6 fatigue, or my bad, 6 action points and 15 fatigue to wield this weapon. When you get Axe Mastery, this weapon's fatigue cost, I think, drops down to 12. And if I put on a long axe, it's basically the same story. The long axe, 6 AP to attack, action points, you have 9 per turn. And it'll also, with this thing also counts as an axe, so with axe mastery, it'll also be only 12 fatigue to attack with the pole axe per turn. And basically what these jackasses do is they run around pretty much like this, and they will have the quick hands perk that allows them to swap these two weapons pretty much once per turn whenever they want to. So if something, and what's great about it is that, let's see here, what do I want to talk about? Is that you can move 1 hex, which as long as you have Pathfinder, at most, it'll only ever cost 3 action points, no matter what the terrain is, to move 1 hex to a minimum of 2 action points per tile. So it'll even be less than that. So the idea behind this build is it can move 1 hex forward, and that costs it 3 action points. Then it can spend the remaining 6 action points that it has to make an attack. On top of that, the movement with Pathfinder means that your movement will cost, moving that 1 hex will cost at most 3 stamina. And your melee attack with Axe Mastery will only cost 12 stamina, which is exactly 15 stamina. Hence the phrase, a 0 stamina build. In other words, this brother, if he only has 15 stamina to work with, which is the lowest amount of stamina you will ever have to work with in Battle Brothers outside of sustaining an injury, he can maintain not only 1 hex worth of movement, but his full terrifying two-handed axe DPS, which means he is never stamina throttled on his DPS ever, and he's also highly mobile while maintaining a terrifying amount of DPS. So he can move 1 hex forward, bitch slap with a two-handed axe, or he can move 1 hex forward and he can bitch slap 2 hexes away with a pole axe, and he can do that forever without his DPS being throttled whatsoever. That is the meta. That is the gold standard. Okay? The only 2 builds that even come remotely close to this in 0 stamina performance are Noble Swords. Let's throw a Noble Sword here. Okay, cool. Are Noble Swords. Schwink, schwink. And where's the last one here? The Qatal Dagger. Yeah. And the dagger. We'll just throw a dagger on there. Now, in both cases, if you're going to have a Noble Sword build or you're going to have a Qatal Dagger build, you're, without exception, going to have, like, a shield on, whether you like it or not, right? This is a bit more noticeable of a stamina drain with the Noble Sword than it is with the Qatal Dagger, because the Qatal Dagger costs no stamina to equip and wear, which is awesome, but it does cost you, 14 stamina to put on a shield. I don't even think that's diminished by the shield mastery. But a Noble Sword does cost you 8 fatigue to wear. So you can see I've only got 43 stamina to work with when I have the Noble Sword on, but when I throw on the Qatal Dagger, suddenly I have 47 stamina to work with. It's a difference of 4, and I'm wondering why. Does my mastery cut it in half or something? Or are you athletic? Like, what the hell's going on here? Why is it only half? Oh, it's half because it's in the inventory. I'm a dumbass. Okay, there we go. All right, so you can see with the Qatal Dagger, I've got 51 stamina to work with. But if I put on the longsword, the Noble Sword, suddenly I got 43, right? You won't really. That's a noticeable difference, but we'll talk about that in a second. So if you put on the Noble Sword and you look at how much an attack costs with a Noble Sword, you'll see that it costs 10 fatigue per turn. With the 25% reduction from Sword Mastery, it'll suddenly only cost 8 per turn, which means that to attack twice with my Noble Sword, it only costs me 16 fatigue a turn. That is so incredibly stamina efficient that this weapon, even if I only have 15 stamina to work with per turn and I'm getting punched in the face by 2 enemies per turn, like we talked about before, I might spend 1 out of 5 of my turns. I'll only get to attack once, but every other turn, this weapon is going to be swinging twice as long as I'm stationary. if I'm forced to move with this brother and I have the Pathfinder perk, I'll move. I'll attack only once. This build will actually start regenerating stamina, meaning I'll have even more than 15 stamina to work with the next turn if this thing is forced to move, but its DPS does get cut in half, right? The Qatal Dagger is a bit of is fascinatingly kind of the same animal. Let me take a drink of water here. So to start with, you just end up having 8 more stamina because the Qatal Dagger doesn't have a stamina cost behind it, unlike the Noble Sword. Attacking 3 times with a Qatal Dagger, this guy actually does have Dagger Mastery, is going to cost this brother 18 stamina. If I do a special attack, it'll be 24 stamina a turn. But again, you have to assume that 2 enemies are punching you in the face the entire time. And we can pick up a calculator here really fast and just see what the situation is. Let's get a calculator. Turn on some aircon. There we go. Calculator. Right. So if I attack 3 times a turn with this brother, it's going to cost me 18 stamina drain. And I'm getting attacked by enemies, so that's a further 4 stamina drain a turn. And I'm recovering 15 stamina a turn, so I'm losing. If I'm in a situation where I'm attacking 3 times a turn with my Qatal Dagger, and I'm getting punched in the face, assuming it's not hitting me, which is a really good assumption because you're wearing a shield, at least twice a turn, I'm going to be losing 7 stamina a turn on my Qatal Dagger, okay? But we have 51 stamina in reserve with this brother right here. So if I take 51 and I divide it by 7, you can see the number of turns that this brother gets to maintain his full triple attack DPS before he'll finally start having to not attack anymore because he is stamina throttled, right? This says 7.3 basically, 7.3 turns, but it is essentially 8 turns. And the reason for that is because if you've never played Battle Brothers, a combat that lasts 8 turns is super, super rare in Battle Brothers. On top of that, at some point in time during this fighting, he'll actually kill the thing in front of him and be forced to move to the next target. And the sheer act of moving with this build will cause you to start regenerating stamina as opposed to losing stamina over time. Because the best he can do is, like, move 1 hex, which will be like, minus 2 stamina. And then, like, attack twice, which will cost him, like, 12 stamina. And then it's very unlikely he's getting punched in the face anymore after moving once and attacking twice. So you can see that we're at negative 14 stamina a turn, and we're recovering 15 stamina a turn. It gets even better, of course, if he was forced to move further, because you can only make 1 attack. So we minus 6, but we plus 2 from the movement. So we lost an attack, but we moved an extra tile. It just is what it is, right? So generally speaking, these Qatal Dagger bros can attack for 8 turns before their DPS is finally throttled by stamina issues. The Noble Sword is in a different league, though. She's even more terrifyingly efficient. Yes, you have even less stamina. We only have 43 stamina to work with right now. But every time we attack, double attack, it's going to be 16. Plus 4 because we're getting punched in the dick by the enemies, and then minus 15, which means we're losing 5 stamina a turn. 43 stamina divided by 5. So this brother can then go for 9 turns, give or take, before being throttled by stamina. But as we also talked about, what will happen on that turn when he's throttled by stamina is that he will only use 6 plus 4, right? Because we're still getting punched by the enemies. And then plus 15. So the next, so there'll be a turn where he can only attack once. And then next turn, even if he's still getting attacked by 2 enemies, he'll suddenly have 20 stamina to work with. And yeah, so the next, it'll literally be out of every 5 turns, he can only attack once. And for the remaining 4 turns, this guy gets to attack twice. So Noble Sword, absolutely amazing for that reason. Not to mention you get like the plus 10% chance to hit, which may or may not be effective, which we'll talk about here in a second. We'll analyze just how effective that is. So if I had to do this army over again, and I might actually just reload a much earlier save and do this army over again, and just test out Noble Swords just to see what the hell happens. But the TLDR here is that things like this, this is not a very good roll. You can see it's only 81. This is the legendary Qatal Dagger. It's only 81% effective against armor. But what this is basically telling me and showcasing me and playtesting is that the Qatal Daggers with shields are absolutely amazing, especially when you pair them with Peasant Militia, and then you take into account shredding armor with your, like, you know, 6 or more ranged bros in the back is an absolutely amazing build, because there's a very strong case of synergy there. You're essentially a 0 stamina build because you get to attack for 1,000,000 years without actually throttling your DPS. The next best thing, or it might be better, it might be worse, it's really hard to say, are the Noble Swords, because once you get Noble Swords are just great weapons in and of themselves, and Peasant Militia, unlike Hedge Knight Army, but we'll talk about this in a second, can actually really make use of the plus 10% chance to hit. However, if all these brothers had nothing but, like, let's say they had nothing but legendary Qatal Daggers, or they had nothing but legendary Noble Swords. The legendary Qatal Daggers, we have to assume that you have about a 90% armor penetration, but they can get up to 100% armor penetration. When you give armor penetration to a Qatal Dagger, it starts going Super Saiyan very, very quickly. But the Noble Swords, almost without exception, will at least have 100% armor damage to armor. And because of that, they'll just end up doing, like, amazing stuff. Again, I got these numbers right here in the brackets. My bad. Boom, 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 boom. In the brackets right here. Which is, okay, what does it look like once we upgrade from basic bitch Qatal Daggers and Noble Swords to legendaries? Well, this one's going to be 100% or more damage to armor, and this one's going to be like 85 to 90%-ish damage to armor. If the Qatal Daggers get up to 100% damage to armor, they're going to outperform the Noble Swords 100%. But the Noble Swords are still just going to do amazing in general, especially when you factor in they can actually kind of make use of the plus 10% chance to hit. All right, so the last thing to talk about here is the last thing that really pissed me off, which was people saying the Peasant Militia origin is either literally they put it mid-tier in their tier list videos, and the only complaint they have about it is that it has a rough start. But I've never seen anybody go into the math of, like, let's just look at it really fast. Let's just do this thing. Come on, we can do this. All right, let's go to, let's look at military cleaver really fast. So a lot of people say military cleavers are really good. I can totally see why. They come base with like 95% armor, which we already talked about is kind of the minimum break point for damage to armor for at least one-handed weapons. By the time you start getting, just like the Noble Swords, by the time you start getting legendaries of these, they're easily going to go above and beyond, like, you know, Ultra Plus. They're going to get over 100%, and at that point, the bonuses are just linear, but we really want it to get over 100%. We want it to be at least 90%. We want it to get over 100%. And the Cleavers have the added benefit that, unlike the Noble Sword, the legendary Noble Sword, which will be good against armor, but once the armor falls off, it's just okay versus HP, or the Qatal Dagger, which is a complete inverse, which is it sucks versus armor, but it does it does decently versus armor, but then it does amazingly against unarmored targets. The Cleaver has a very similar story where she does decently well against armor, but once the thing runs out of armor, she starts doing amazing because of the stuff. Cleavers cause bleed damage, and military cleavers cause even more bleed damage. and Cleaver Mastery causes even more bleed damage. Literally doubles the bleed damage effect. And on top of that, whips are also part of Cleaver Mastery. So you can quick hands into a whip. Let's get a whip here really fast. Where is this? Where is this military cleaver bro at? Where are you at, bro? Are you down here? Okay, cool. Not max level, huh? These things, so you can easily quick hands into a whip with this bro, and you can do some disarming, you can do some ranged attacks against unarmored targets. Whips are absolutely disgusting and amazing as far as damage is concerned because of all the bleed damage. A really good pairing, a really good one-handed weapon synergy here. There aren't a lot of good one-handed weapon synergies in Battle Brothers, but the most notable ones are Qatal Dagger, Dagger Mastery, Peasant Militia with throwing axes for the backline, because they shred the armor and then they do the rest, right? Or they get the armor low and then the Qatal Daggers do the rest. The other one is just Noble Swords. Noble Swords being just amazingly well-rounded, especially when they start getting legendary. The Noble Swords don't need the backline to really shred the armor all that much, but they also benefit from a shredding of the armor nonetheless. The Qatal Daggers synergize amazingly well with Fearsome, of course, whereas with the Noble Swords, you might not, I can see not taking Fearsome and instead taking like Killing Frenzy or just some other perk around here in general. Probably the Dodge perk would be the best one. Or, yeah, you wouldn't want Backstabber. Yeah, Dodge perk or Extra Bags and Belts. Would I want to quick hands anything? No. Yeah, I'll just take the Dodge perk, to be perfectly honest. Yep. Let's think about it. Yeah, so those are the three like one-handed builds that really stand out to me after looking more deeply in the game. Qatal Daggers, Noble Swords, and then every military cleavers, which is, people kind of know military cleavers. The downside to military cleavers is that they do have a bit of a fatigue issue, right? So the Noble Swords can just go forever and ever and ever and ever, and the Qatal Daggers can effectively go forever and ever and ever and ever as far as, you know, Battle Brothers is concerned. The Zero Stamina build can literally go forever, which is probably overkill in Battle Brothers as far as stamina efficiency. Military Cleaver, however, it would minus this by 3, I do believe. Yeah, so a normal attack from Military Cleaver is 12 fatigue. It would reduce this by 3, right? Let's think about this for a second. 25%, yeah, so it'd be 2.5, and then an extra, I do believe that is 3. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So if I had Cleaver Mastery, then my attacks would cost 9 a turn, which means a double Cleaver attack would cost 18 a turn, and we've already looked at what 18 looks like with the Qatal Daggers, so you can be pretty sure what it's going to look like with the Cleaver. You can literally go 8 turns double swinging your Cleaver and be perfectly fine with it. On top of that, there are some weird elements to legendary weapons. So legendary weapons, and I've been super lucky this run through with legendary armors, but I've been very unlucky with legendary weapons. So I only have one legendary weapon in my entire army, and it's this damn Qatal Dagger. Legendary weapons can come with a fatigue reduction on them, and how do I put this? You don't want a Qatal Dagger with fatigue reduction. And the game is nice enough to understand this, so it very rarely gives you a Qatal Dagger with fatigue damage reduction. You don't want Noble Swords that have fatigue damage reduction on them because, you know, you're already so efficient. You would rather have the armor value pumped up. And the game is also kind of nice to you and doesn't, I don't think, it doesn't usually give you a fatigue damage reduction on your Noble Sword. So that's nice because you want armor on the daggers and you want armor on the Noble Swords. But with the Cleavers, you actually kind of want fatigue damage on the Cleaver. And the game is also kind of nice to you, I think, and gives you, very often will give you a stamina reduction cost on your Cleaver. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, best one-handed weapons in the game are probably Cleavers, Daggers. Those are the ones that really stand out. Axes cost, rather than costing 9 a turn, they cost 10, even though they're amazing. Once you get legendary one-handed axes, we can look at a one-handed axe really fast here. Legendary one-handed axes, they cost 10 a turn to swing, which sucks. But once you start getting the legendary ones that have fatigue reduction, they become super viable, if not one of the best one-handed weapons in the entire game, which is awesome. What else is there to say about this stuff? Like, that's about it. Spears just have too much attack. You can't use it all, and their damage is too low. But Qatal Daggers, amazing. Noble Swords, amazing. Cleavers are absolutely amazing. Axes are great, but they really need to be legendary axes with a fatigue damage reduction before they start going, becoming competitive with anything else that we're talking about here. Flails are weird. I do have a flail. Let's put it on really fast. Flails are great for their special ability for knocking down people's heads. What else is there to say about that? Oh, the Qatal Dagger, when you do get a stamina cost reduction on the Qatal Dagger, basically what happens to the Qatal Dagger is that your basic attack becomes bad, and your I do 33% more damage and more armor pen versus targets that are dazed. Yeah, your special ability with the Qatal Dagger suddenly becomes on the menu. That's something that it literally just occurred to me. So if you try to use this ability 3 times in a turn, that's a minus 24 fatigue, or you're going to be stamina throttled very quickly. It's totally not worth it. But if we end up getting fatigue reduction on a Qatal Dagger, then the next thing you know, you're just death blowing into oblivion. Because at that point, it'll probably cost you 6 fatigue to do a death blow on this damn thing, which is the same as a normal attack. So you might as well get the noticeable increase in damage, which is great. Does it have more armor damage? What's going on here? Inflicts 30 to 55 damage to hit points, which is normal. 0 to 16, which can ignore armor. That's more than normal, so you got greater penetration. And then it does 24 to 36 damage to armor. Is this a legendary? Okay, yeah, it's a legendary. Never mind. I'm like, damn, dude, why are you doing so much damage to armor? That's not normal. Because it's the damn legendary dagger. Okay, cool, got it. Yeah, okay, so there's one last thing to talk about, and it has to do with Peasant Militia, the starting origin, which is why I'm in this damn game anyways. Options, no, quit. Yep, we're going to quit. We're going to pretend we're making a new company. New campaign, and then we're going to go Peasant Militia. So the upside to Peasant Militia, there's 2 main negatives to Peasant Militia. The origin. The first one is that you start the game with 12 brothers, and they're basically in loincloths. So you're kind of poor, which means the first fight you're going to get into, you're going to fight a lot of enemies that are probably going to kill some of your brothers. The start of a Peasant Militia origin can be kind of rough. I'll talk about how to deal with that in a second. Once you figure out how to deal with it, it's literally not an issue whatsoever. However, the benefit to the Peasant Militia is that you can have up to 16 Battle Brothers on the field at a time. So rather than just 12 Battle Brothers, you have 16 Battle Brothers. 12 Battle Brothers can get overwhelmed pretty quickly if you don't do enough damage. I think I agree with that assessment with what people are saying. But you do not have this problem at all with 16 Battle Brothers. There is no overwhelmed issue whatsoever. Because again, they need to kill and or do enough damage to 4 of your brothers to get them to want to run away and out of combat before you are literally at a 12-man team. And so they, by overwhelmed, what they literally mean is that your brothers are taking so many attacks per turn and they're losing so much stamina per turn that their DPS their DPS is suddenly getting throttled even more than normal, which means that they're taking even more damage. And then, oh look, 2 of my brothers have taken so much damage that I need to get them off the line, so they just can't even fight anymore. And suddenly we went from having 12 brothers to having 10 brothers fighting stamina throttled and fighting for their lives, right? This is not an experience you have when you have 16 battle brothers. Because if 2 of your brothers have to go away, you still have 14 fucking battle brothers, and it's more stamina regeneration a turn in total. It is less of your brothers are getting punched more than twice a turn, so you're not getting stamina throttled anywhere near as much, blah, 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 blah. But the other downside is supposed to be you can never hire anyone that isn't a low-born peasant. And that got me interested in looking at Hedge Knights versus what is essentially the Hedge Knight of a Peasant Militia playthrough, which is a militiaman. So your best brothers to recruit in a militia origin are militiamen and manhunters and almost nobody else. If you're really, really lucky, you'll get an amazing... let me actually load up my army really fast. If you're really lucky, you'll get yourself like a really good sellsword. But as a general rule, you're just using basic bros here. So this guy's a miner, 91 attack, almost 70 melee defense with legendary shield. This guy is a thief. He's got no stars, but because he's a thief, his melee attack is almost 60, which makes him viable. Really, these guys should have heater shields on if we're going to be looking at them like this. Yes, sir. I'm getting ready to go fight the Barbarian King, so of course we're not wearing heater shields today. This guy is a deserter. I actually found a good deserter. I was shocked. He had high rolls on almost every single stat that is normally abysmal with them, so I could actually get his resolve up high enough. 101 attack, 65 melee armor with this better than normal legendary shield. This guy is a bit of a Chad. But you can see here that our melee attacks are in the low 90s on average. That's something to take note of. Melee defense very high because we all have a bunch of shields. This guy is an effing shepherd with 90 attack and 2 stars. What was the 95? Okay, yeah, so he's got 3 stars. Sure-footed, militiaman, iron lungs. This guy is he's like the perfect brother. This is like the perfect Hedge Knight brother practically, and maybe his melee attack is a little low. He doesn't even have stars in melee defense, and it's still 63. That's kind of stupid. I've been very unlucky with my militiamen, but I've got a bunch of Chads anyways that just aren't militiamen. Yeah, this guy kind of sucks, 87, 62. But these are the stats that you can kind of, you'll get used to seeing if that makes any sense. But let's go back to the main menu. And we'll go new campaign, we'll go peasant militia, we'll go next, and just start the game. So we can talk about what life looks like in your first peasant militia starts. But one thing I've never seen analyzed is how strong or how weak is the peasant militia origin really? Like from a mathematical perspective, wow, that's a really bad terrain. Jesus. Okay, let's just get a different start. I'm like, oh yeah, there's like one city you can go to. I'm like, oh, thanks. Nope, cancel. We're gonna go new, next. Okay. Like, just how bad is it that we don't have access to Hedge Knights, and instead we are only recruiting peasant militia at best? You can finish this, and we'll go do that thing. Yeah, it might be a little better. It's the same thing, not better at all. Great, whatever. I'll show you what I mean by how to start a peasant militia here in a second. So I've never seen anybody compare peasant militia, their stats to like a militiaman. So we're going to do that right now. It turns out there's some interesting stuff to take note of. Note number 1. These stats are their maximum and their high roll. The reason for this is because the militiamen had like a +5 to +6, and the Hedge Knights had like +10 to like +9 to their melee attack versus like melee defense, respectively. So since there wasn't an extreme variance in the plussing to the stats over like a normal brother, I just decided to take the max stats. The other thing to note here is that it is without gifted, right? So, and I consider that to be a really good compromise. Are you going to get a max statted brother? Probably not. But you also have gifted, which will basically make them a max stat brother, which means that these are reasonable numbers for you to be looking at with your playthrough with Battle Brothers. in your comparison. All right, so the first thing to note is that hedge knights actually get way more stats overall than a peasant militiaman. So the peasant militiaman like gets like +6 stats to like all +5, +6 stats to almost every stat in the game, whereas the hedge knight gets like +10 to +11 stats to just about everything in the game. And the one thing that the hedge knight really has a stat bonus over the militiaman is in HP. But that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things because this hedge knight can easily get to 100 HP. So can this militiaman. It just means that this hedge knight will have even more. He'll have even more levels to put into other things like stamina. The hedge knight's resolve is also very high baseline. So they'll get it to like 45 or 50, and then the rest of the points will go probably into stamina. So it just means that hedge knights on average are going to have about 5 more melee attack, and they're going to have about 3 more melee defense, and they're probably going to have something like 15 to 20 more stamina to play with than a militiaman, which is great and awesome and very powerful. But these things are not, this is nowhere near the cost of like, you know, it doesn't make up for +4 brothers, like any way, shape, or form, by any stretch of the imagination, which I thought was interesting. What is there to say here? Okay. So in Battle Brothers, the vast majority of your enemies have 10 melee defense. And the way melee attack works in the game, we need to put this in perspective. The way melee attack works in the game is it's literally melee attack minus melee defense in % chance to hit form. So this hedge knight with 108 melee attack, if I minus 10 melee defense from that, he has a 98% chance to hit the enemy, which of course the best you can have in the game is a 95% chance to hit the enemy. What this means is that for the vast majority of enemies in Battle Brothers, any melee attack that goes over 105 is basically wasted. It's only going to be useful against a handful of enemies in the game, and it's only going to be useful against enemies that have shields in the game. The vast majority, 105 melee attack is basically your breakpoint. Anything over that is effectively diminishing returns into oblivion. All right. So if anything, this hedge knight here has way too much melee attack, and this militiaman is almost perfect melee attack. Right, 103 on average. Beautiful. Right, cool. So hit points aren't really an issue. It just means hedge knights can have more stamina. They can both easily hit their 100 HP breakpoint. The fact that the hedge knight has noticeably more melee attack doesn't really matter. The melee defense is a little bit more important, but that brings up the other mechanic of melee defense. So melee defense works as we just described it until you hit 50 melee defense, and then any melee defense over 50 melee defense is effectively cut in half. So to give you an idea of that, if you have a brother that has 60 melee defense, you're not going to take the enemy's attack and then subtract 60 from it. That's not what's going to happen. Instead, what happens is I need to minus 50 from this, and then I need to divide this by 2, and then I need to add the 50 back. So rather than minusing 60, you'll only be minusing 65 in this particular case from the enemy's chance to hit you. The reason for this is because that 10 points that went over 50 is being cut in half. If it would be broken if the game didn't do this, because the value of that -1%, -1%, -1% that you're getting from melee defense starts going Super Saiyan very quickly. Literally, just in the opposite way we were talking about how bad it is to be below 100%, or to get. It's really bad to get closer and closer to 50%, only 50% armor, damage to armor, whatever. I'm rambling at that point. I'll just shut up. So hopefully you get the idea. So, Control Z. I want to Control Z around here. Okay, so if we look at this hedge knight, for example, if this hedge knight attacked another hedge knight that had the exact same stats as this guy, The parentheses here, by the way, are this is the base attack of the brother. This is what the stat will look like if it has 3 stars in it without, my bad. This is the base attack of the brother if it's max rolled. And then this is what it looks like if it's max rolled and it has 3 stars without gifted. Okay? This is what the melee defense looks like on a Hedge Knight if it's max rolled. This is what it looks like with 3 stars on max roll without gifted, right? The 3 stars are going to increase it by plus 35. The exact same thing happens with the militiamen. So we have a Hedge Knight here that at max rank with 3 stars in attack and 3 stars in melee defense. He's going to have 108 melee attack and he's going to have 45 melee defense. Compared to our militiamen who will have 103 melee attack, but only 42 melee defense by the time he is fully geared out. Then these parentheses over here are what if they're using a shield or what if they're not using a shield. So if you have a Hedge Knight, his melee defense is already so close to 50%, and he's a damn Hedge Knight. You might as well be a Zero-Stam build brother with the Hedge Knight, which means he doesn't have a shield. So his melee defense has not changed. He's just a 40, so he still has 45 melee defense. Compared to the militiaman, who is rocking probably something like 65-ish melee defense, or I think he's rocking, this one's rocking like 66 melee defense. But once we factor in the diminishing returns past over 50%, it's only going to be reducing it by 58. So at this point, what I'm basically comparing here is a Zero-Stam built Great Axe wielding Hedge Knight Battle Brother compared to a militiaman that is also Zero Stamina built, or he has a shield, right, type deal. And what we can see is that if I don't have a shield, most enemies in the game have like a 70% chance to hit you. The scarier enemies in the game will have like a 75% chance to hit you. Orcs, I think, have 75% melee attack. Mercenaries have 75% melee attack. Chosen Axemen or Barbarian Chosen have a 75% melee attack. But the vast majority of enemy melee attacks are like 65, 70, or 75. So we're just going to take an average of like 70% chance. You can see here that our Hedge Knight without a shield, most things in the game are going to hit him about 25% of the time, which is not bad, right? If he had gifted there, that would probably be as low as a 21, 22% chance to hit the Hedge Knight, which is not bad at all. But once you put a shield on this militia brother, it's basically cut in half. So this whole time we've been comparing one-handed brother builds, their DPS, to two-handed brother builds. And the elephant in the room this entire time has been, well, the one-handed battle brother is going to be wearing a shield, guaranteed. So what does that increase how much does that increase their survivability? And the answer is that it basically doubles it doubles or more than doubles the increase of their survivability, especially when you start talking about legendary shields. If we're talking about legendary shields, then you're talking about more than doubling the Battle Brothers' survivability by the sheer act of putting a shield on them, right? So at that point, we can start putting everything in context. We actually have all the puzzle pieces here to start putting everything in context, which is that, and we have to compare this to this, which is basically best summarized by this little bit right here, which is that using great axes and quick hands and along with long axes get you a battle brother that does that probably does twice the amount of damage to armored targets than the one-handed builds in the game. Like on average, they're going to do about twice the damage. And they definitely do better damage while staying mobile. They definitely do more than double damage while staying mobile. However, they are effectively half as durable as the one-handed brothers. So the one-handed brothers are twice as hard to kill as the two-handed brothers, but the two-handed brothers effectively do twice as much damage as the one-handed brothers, and they can maintain a lot more of that damage while being mobile. Legendary weapons and legendary shields start shifting that math a little bit. The two-handed axe brothers start doing. What do I want to say? They start doing slightly less damage than double damage of the one-handed swords. The one-handed swords and one-handed daggers, the one-handed cleavers start doing probably about 90%. My bad. What am I trying to say here? Do I want to talk about it in percentages? Yeah. The one-handed weapons are doing half the damage of the two-handed weapons. By the time you give them legendary weapons, though, they start doing like 60% of the weapon damage of the two-handed weapons, somewhere in that vicinity. However, there is still a mobile DPS issue. If you're forced to move, your mobile DPS is still not that great with the one-handed weapons compared to the two-handed weapons. That being said, because the one-handed weapon builds do less damage, they don't move as much. You know what I mean? Because they're not killing quite as much, so that's not really that big of a problem. Fights do last longer, which sucks because it means that you're getting attacked longer, but the enemies have like half the amount of half the chance to hit you as they do with the other one. The moral of the story is the game is incredibly well balanced, dynamic, and even though two-handed brothers are amazing, they're not all that much better than one-handed brothers. I think what it really is that if you've only got 12 brothers to work with, damn, do I want to go there is the question. How long is this video already? Oh, great, an hour and a half. That's not bad for me. What am I trying to say here? There's one last element to consider in your army builds. I guess I do have to go there. But what I'm trying to point out is that at a fundamental level, the game is incredibly well balanced. The one-handed Battle Brother builds will do half the damage, a little bit better than half the damage of the two-handed. We'll just say half the damage. They do half the damage of the two-handed axe brother builds, but they're twice as hard to hit and so can last twice as long, meaning that it ends up being a very well-rounded game in that sense. What really kind of pushes things over the edge, in my opinion, and there's a lot more nuance here, right? Is that the 12 Hedge Knight Battle Brother army has some weaknesses to it. And the most notable weakness to it, I need to go load that game really fast here. The most notable weakness to it is the fact that 2 of your brothers have to be dedicated tanks in that army. Otherwise, you start having issues. So let me reduce my Battle Brother number down to 12 bros. Okay, so I'm not 16 bros anymore. I've only got 12 Battle Brothers, right? So what your typical meta Zero-Stam 200 axe army will look like is it'll look something like this. You'll have, I think it literally looks like this. Put that guy home. Yeah. I think that's the more correct build. Yeah, okay, cool. So it'll look closer to something like this with this kind of combat arrangement, where you have 3 giant 2-axe wielding, you have 6 0 stamina 2-handed axe brothers, right? 300 armor, battle forge, quick hands, great axe, long axe to quick hands, back and forth from giant beat sticks in your army. But then you also need to have two mega tanks on the flanks here, preferably. These tanks may or may not be lone wolves, but you need to have two really, really good tanks in your army. Because if you don't have tanks in your army, only having 12 Battle Brothers is going to cause you to have issues against large groups of enemies. Like if you're fighting like 24 orcs, if you just had all these brothers be two-handed axe brothers, you're going to have some serious problems. This army effectively is like it's a specialist army build, and you have your front line is mostly designed to do damage. Some of the best DPS damaging frontline brothers in the entire game. But again, there's a 25% chance they get hit by most enemies in the game, which means you need to have at least two mega tanks running interference for them in order to make sure that these guys get like the 1v1 fights that they're going to absolutely dominate in. And they aren't like, fighting like 3v1 because these guys are holding down like, 5 or 6 guys on the flanks, right? What this means for the army as a whole, however, is that 2 of your brothers don't do any damage. Like a mega tank is a brother that's going to have Indomitable. They're going to wield like a goblin spear because it's only -4 AP, and all you're really interested in is the plus 20% chance to hit from the spear. And their melee defense will probably be something stupid like 80 melee defense or like 75 melee defense, so that everything in the game only has like a 5% chance to hit them. And with Indomitable and Recover and Shield Master, Shield Expert, they're borderline unkillable, but your army is basically on a timer to finish the fight before these guys get their shields chopped into pieces, before these guys start having stamina issues from taking so many attacks a turn, before these guys end up actually kicking the bucket, right? Because they can't Indomitable every turn. They're going to have to stop and recover at some point, and life is just rough if these guys are forced to do their job. And then your back line for the zero stamina meta build is a bunch of is at least 3 to 4 throwing axemen, and they're usually not wearing shields or like duelist headhunter. They may or may not have berserk, but I think they're just duelist headhunter, frenzy, and they don't even take recover. But they're also like highly specialized damage dealers that are also squishy and need to be tanked for. So the damage dealing element in your 12-man brother army is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 frontline brothers with 2-handed axemen, and then like 4 throwers in the background. The point is, it's not an entire 12-man team of like Giga Chads with 2-handed axes, even though you could do that. I mean, be my guest. Which is one of the main problems with the army, compared to like my army here, which theoretically it'll have like 5 to 6 spear throwers in the background, and then it'll have like a front line of like 9 dagger bros. There are no dedicated mega tanks in the army whatsoever because everyone's wearing a shield. Everyone is already tanky as all hell, so there's just no point to it. And I can talk about it later in other videos. But what am I trying to say here? I don't have I don't have any brother who's like, I'm going to sacrifice my DPS for durability. It's just that there's a general sacrificing of DPS for durability across the board. And so if we look at it really fast here, if I pull up a calculator and I assume that the 2-handed axe brothers are doing like 160 DPS, let's assume that the spear throwers are also doing like 160 DPS, which is actually completely reasonable for them. What you can see here is that one army is doing 160 DPS times 160 times 6 frontline bros equals, and then they also have up to 4 guys in the back. So I guess I got to multiply this 160 DPS by 10, right? So in total versus armored targets, the meta army build will do 1,600-ish DPS, somewhere in that vicinity, with all cylinders firing to the enemy, because 2 of their battle brothers are dedicated tanks. And then we look at like a one-handed Battle Brother build. And we'll do like a Noble Sword here. I won't do legendary weapons, even though that's like a thing. Each of these guys staying stationary will do like 90, my bad. They'll do about 80 damage. They literally do half the damage. Okay, cool. That will, yeah, buff up if we have some epic Noble Swords. But we're going to have something stupid like, let me think. I got to multiply this by 9. Because that's 9 frontline bros. So they do 720-ish armor damage. And then the 6 backline bros are getting multiplied by 160. They probably do less because they're not hunters, right? I haven't looked at the difference between a hunter and like whatever the hell we're using. So we'll multiply it by 150 just to be a bit more generous. And then, so that's 900. Cool. So it was 80 times 9 equals plus 900 equals. And you can already see that the Peasant Militia Army, despite having less effective Battle Brothers, despite having not being a quote-unquote meta build, they still have a very similar playstyle, and they still output a very similar amount of DPS, despite being sword and board. Because there's no mega tanks dragging down your DPS. There are no, and you have +4 brothers, which is just a raw DPS increase in general. And you have 4 more. You have significantly more backliners chucking spears into the enemy than you otherwise would have, which is doing way more DPS. Than normal. And of course, you know, everyone is just like twice as hard to kill than they otherwise would be in the front line. So in my opinion, sword and board armies are actually amazing in Battle Brothers. And you can do the meta, which is this, right? 6 Zero-Stam, 2-handed axes, 2 mega tanks, and then more DPS in the back. That is completely viable. Or you can do what the hell I'm doing. Load campaign. Or you can do what the hell I'm doing, which is realize that if you play Peasant Militia and you can use Qatal Daggers or Noble Swords and just have like you'll have a very similar power level and gaming experience to the meta build, but you'll just also have a completely different play style in the game. Some other things to note here. If I had to rebuild this army, and I might do it after all this research, I would consider not taking Steel Brow on my brothers, just because Steel Brow, it makes amazing sense for a 0 stamina brother because enemies have a 25% chance to hit them. But when my brothers have like a 10% chance to be hit almost across the board, and there's like 16 of them, so they're not getting ganged up on quite as much, I'm not really feeling the Steel Brow perk all that much in the game. So I would probably swap out the Steel Brow perk for Killing Frenzy instead. If I'm Qatal Dagger, I'm 100% behind Fearsome. If I'm not Qatal Dagger, I would probably take the Dodge perk instead, because that would make my 10% chance to be hit suddenly be something stupid like an 8% chance to be hit, which more than offsets the loss of Steel Brow. So I would probably remove Fearsome and put it into Killing Frenzy, and remove Steel Brow and put it into the Dodge perk. That's if I was Swords. And the reason why I bring that up is, remember that our melee attack breakpoint was 105. You can see that most of these brothers are in the low like 90s, right? Which means that putting Noble Swords on them with the plus 10% chance to hit, I lose almost nothing in the grand scheme of things, which is awesome, right? But once I put the Noble Sword on, I don't need things like Backstabber or anything like that anymore. If I had to rebuild this Qatal Dagger army, I would not take Steel Brow, and instead I would consider taking Dodge for the noticeable increased survivability, or even taking Backstabber to help offset the fact that these guys are not at their attack breakpoint or anywhere near that yet. I would still keep Fearsome. I probably wouldn't take Frenzy over it. even though this seems counterintuitive somewhat, because the whole point of the backline is they shred the armor, and then the Qatal Daggers can just rip into the raw HP of the enemy, which means that the Qatal Daggers are soaking up most of the kills in most of the fights. So if you're going to have Killing Frenzy on anyone, it will probably be your Qatal Daggers. But as you can see here, I've got Killing Frenzy on the backline. My backline's a little bit special. You can see here that like they have even more melee defense than the front line. This is actually proven surprisingly effective, giving my backliners shields, and then because what it causes is I get to take them in fights that I otherwise wouldn't want to take backliners, like especially against orcs, right? Because the orcs are gonna shove their way through my men, and they're gonna get on top of the backliners. They're gonna be like, haha, now you have issues. You can't throw with your weapons. Except these guys have such high melee defense, they just get to back up a hex and throw their damn axes anyways. And that is one fight where I greatly appreciate taking a bunch of throwing axes to shred the enemy orc armor, so the Qatal Daggers can just absolutely murk their 200 HP pool. Against unholds, I get to take these guys as well. The Qatal Daggers are 100% Super Saiyan against unholds, so you probably don't even need to take the backliners, but it's just fun and exciting that I get to take a bunch of backliners there as well. The other reason for having them have incredibly high melee defense is sometimes what will happen in the front lines, especially if I'm rocking this 6 throwers in the back as opposed to only the 4 that I have right now. I only have 4 because I could only find 4, and it just so happens they all have incredible melee defense. So I was like, all right, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound. Is that sometimes your brothers in the front line need to fall back. Like they're taking so much damage, they just need to get the hell out of dodge. And rather than having this compromise the line formation integrity, what I can then do is I can then literally just put my bait, what are essentially nimble tanks at this point, throwing axemen. They can just go up into the front line, and they can either put on a Qatal Dagger and start double attacking every turn away, or they can just shield wall their happy little asses off in the front line. And they're literally just backup frontliners, and that'll always be at a point in the game where it doesn't matter that they're a nimble tank and they have less armor. They just end up being good frontliners anyways. And they have quick hands. They could very easily have a Qatal Dagger here. So this guy is just like, yep, you just... So this brother literally shield walls and runs away. So he's not really in combat anymore. And if I wanted to, I could give him like a throwing axe so that if anybody's forced to pull off, he can still throw some axes. Not the best. I don't recommend that at all. I keep thinking maybe there's something he could do. Maybe I'll have like a pole axe. So if he has to fall off the line, I'll put him in a pole axe. And 99% of the time, the answer is just run. Just get the hell out of here. You're completely shredded. I don't want anyone accidentally shooting you or injuries or anything stupid like that. Just go. We don't need you anymore. Your services are done. But this guy can very easily just... what literally happens is this guy shield walls. The brothers next to him shield wall. Until this guy gets like, you know, a 95% chance not to be hit. He then backs away from the line. And then this brother may or may not also shield wall to help his melee defenses. But he just gets in the front line and then quick hands into a Qatal Dagger. And he just ends up being a frontline bro as well. And I just thought that was a really interesting army design and an interesting way to play Battle Brothers. And it's something I've been theorizing about playing Battle Brothers as. And I played it, and it works perfectly, and it's awesome. But very quickly, I ran into the whole... Wait, I'm stabbing these Barbarian Chosen and my Fearsome's not proccing. What the hell's going on? That made me start looking into things. My Qatal Daggers weren't doing anywhere near as much damage as people told me they should be doing. So it started getting me to go look into things. And very quickly I started, like, you know, digging more into the as I like to say, I started looking under the hood of the game and learning a bunch of things. And so I figured I'd make a video. All right, let's talk about the one negative to Peasant Militia Origin, and that is supposedly it has a bad start. All right, cool. We'll just do this really fast. Now, a lot of people that make the videos online, they play a die-hard mode, which means you can't. Anyone who dies is like permanently dead and all that stuff. I think the rest of us, like normal people, just don't do that. This is a terrible start as well. The rest of us normal people just don't do that, like ever. We're a bunch of save scummers and proudly save scumming. So your peasant, if you're allowed to save scum, your peasant militia start is significantly easier than it otherwise could be. Okay, this is a better start. Hell, this is even a really good map. What the fuck? This is a good map. Look at this. Is the arena out here? If the arena is out here, this is a really good map. I might have to save this just for shits and giggles. All right, save campaign. Scroll all the way down here. Sure, save it here. Okay, resume. It's just a good map. Look at that. That's beautiful. Because you got access to the north, you got access to the south via water, and we got access potentially to the arena, wherever the hell the arena is, via the water. All right, but as a peasant militia start, the first thing you have is you have a million really bad brothers. And some of them may or may not be good for late game. Some of them, hopefully, like at least three of these guys will be actually good for late game. But the vast majority of them are terrible. Also, your fundage, even at, I think this is on low funds. You can make the game easier by putting it on high funds. But I'm pretty sure this is on low funds. So we're making it really bad for us right now. Life is just awful and terrible and no good, right? Now, the first thing you want to do is you want to head for the nearest towns, whatever. Oh, come here. Thank you. That's why I wanted to start that had a few towns close by. And you want to buy shields. If you can get your hands on some cheap and butter knives. But you're basically just want to buy shields and butter knives and pitchforks and nothing else. Maybe you recruit another brother. But as a general rule, shields, pitchforks, and blah, 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 blah. The very first fight that you get into, you want it to be versus Weringer or whatever. Basically, the undead zombies with all the decayed gear. The reason for this is because they can only attack you once per turn at most. Whereas if you fight a human opponent with also all the starting gear that you desperately need, they can attack you twice a turn, making them significantly more dangerous than a Weringer fight. Also, when you're fighting Weringer, there's a really good chance you're fighting them like a swamp or a forest or something like that, especially early game. And you have tons of stamina to work with. So, and if you if you knock back an undead in rough terrain, they can't move forward one hex and attack you anymore. So they'll spend their entire turn just moving forward, getting knocked back and getting knocked back and moving forward, and just never attacking you. But you're going to buy shields. Okay, cool. And butter knives. Cool. And pitchforks. There is a cheap pitchfork there. But you're going to do this until everyone in your army... So you have a nice solid backline of 6 brothers, 6 or more brothers, all with pitchforks. Okay, cool. And you have a front line that is wearing some damn shields. If you can find some cheap spears, make sure to put them on the flanks. The reason why we're buying butter knives is a lot of your brothers just won't have enough weapons. And you're going to be tempted to like buy spears and shields, but you don't have enough money for that. And you need butter knives to, like, dagger people down to get their armor anyways. So you just get butter knives. Butter knives are literally better than nothing. This spear is cheap enough. I might want to pick it up. I am money conscious. How many more shields do I need? I still need 1, 2. Yeah, I still need more shields. But one of you guys can be a backline brother. So at this point, I actually don't need any more weapons. Like, we have plenty of weapons. I even bought like one too many butter knives, so I might I'm personally tempted to buy this spear, so I'm going to buy the spear. The next city I go to, I might not actually have enough for whatchamacallit. all the shields. We'll talk about that when we get there. Basically, you buy, make sure that your frontline brothers have bucklers and shields. And the reason you do this is because the shield purchasing is it's more than going to double the survivability of your brother early game. So a brother without a shield is basically dead early game, and a brother with a shield, it's your only defense is not getting hit early game, and the shields just greatly help with that. So it's a bit of an expensive shield. We'll pick it up anyways. Really don't care. No, I don't. Do you even sell shields? I think you sell. Oh, okay, yeah, you do. Those are really expensive though, but I don't think I care. All right, so we're almost. I think we're fully built. Yeah. So this is a good example. So I might buy one more shield. I might stop here. It really doesn't matter. You'll notice I have this one guy with a buckler. Buckler spear combo is fine early game, especially on the flanks, because he's going to have tons of stamina to spear wall all over the place. And on the higher difficulty settings, the enemies will just avoid. They don't actually jump into the spear wall typically. They just walk around it, making this guy a very good flanker holder. Everybody else, though, you definitely want to put shields on them. You can see that, and we'd want our highest melee defense bros in the front rank. So I think this guy would be a back ranker. 19, 20. Why the fuck do you have 15 melee defense? How is this life? So you just, oh, I see. You're just a good brother. Okay, so 15 melee defense is just normal. So this guy is definitely going in the rear with the gear. We are giving this guy a shield because it makes him 19 melee defense. Be mindful of melee defense. Base game, this guy's got 4, so he's coming into the front line. Yeah. 19 melee defense, I can live with that. Okay, cool. Who else has got good melee defense? You got a good melee defense, so I'll give you this and wherever the spear went off to. Where's the spear at? Where's the spear at? There it is. Okay, cool. Spear and butter knife. Got it. Sweet, 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 sweet. Almost done. Okay, cool. So you'd gear up something like this. These brothers have on average 20-ish melee defense. This guy is actually our militiaman's actually a bit of a Chad here. Holy crap! Look at that. He's a good bro. He's gonna have 79, 84 melee attack with the star, and then gifted. We'll probably add another 4 to that. Was it 84 with the star? Yeah. So he's going to have 88 melee attack, which is not bad. And then his melee defense, that is easily a plus 35 melee defense. He's going to have 40 melee defense, which is good. This is a late game bro right here. Not bad at all. His resolve is kind of low. Even his HP is not that high considering. Okay, yeah, it's fine. That's a decent bro. That is a decent bro. All right, cool. Yeah. Anyways, this is how you'll start your fight, and then you want to do your best to fight undead. So if you have to save scum and go looking out into the wilderness for an undead camp, or if you can find a mission that sends you to invest graveyard for grave robbers, you can save scum your way to victory. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Because what'll happen is when they send you to a graveyard, you're fighting one of 3 enemies. You're either fighting undead, you're fighting Nebuchadnezzar, or whatever the heck they're called, ghouls, basically. And then the third and final possibility is you're fighting grave robbers, right? Well, every time you reload the save and you reload the mission and you go back out there, it'll give you a different it'll re-roll what enemy you're facing, so it won't take long before you're fighting undead, which is perfect. And the other one, of course, is if I go off into Narnia here, where would we find undead? We'll head this way. Okay, cool. So I'm probably going to find undead somewhere in this vicinity. Go away. Thank you. Thank you for slowing me down. I'm probably going to find undead somewhere in this vicinity, out here in this swamp. Probably definitely out here in this swamp. If I'm going to fight undead, I want to fight them in rough terrain. And you just save scum the damn thing. brigands. Okay, that's not a good sign. Could I take on 5 brigands? No, they'd probably like murk the crap out of me. They're afraid of me though. So, you know, it is what it is. Maybe I should take that fight. Maybe I shouldn't take that fight. Hard to say. But yeah, you would just... Okay, so brigand camp. Got it. Good to know. But you're basically just save scumming until you're finding like some undead. And then getting the right fight. The first fight is by far the hardest fight. And then from then on, you literally name your brothers in such a way so that if they die, you don't care. You don't. It's actually a good thing pretty early on to lose some brothers. We're getting pretty unlucky with what we're finding out here. Because you actually want to lose brothers, believe it or not. If you go up to 14 brothers, it's really bad. Yeah, okay, fine. We finally found it. And the good thing about that is it's pretty close if we went this way. So we could easily like save scum and do it that way. But let's let these guys hit us so we can actually see what having a shield. Ooh, is he not confident? Okay, that's interesting. What it does for us, kind of a deal. So I want my brothers. We're just gonna click some buttons. Okay, cool. Are we done? Are we done? Okay, cool. Come on, attack me. But we want to get some brothers hit without the shields and some brothers hit with the shields. So you can just see for yourself what the number difference actually looks like in the grand scheme of things. All right, we're going to hold position. I want to put some... I just want some... Okay, I'm going to put this guy here. He should attack him. And we'll just look at these numbers. Okay, come on, just stop, stop, stop. Okay, bite. Hit me anyways, thank you. Okay, so the unarmored guy is named Kale. Kaylee. Your name is Kaylee. Awesome. Kaylee. So Kaylee does not have a shield, and you can see that he has a 42% chance to hit him, right? Pretty scary, especially if it had like an actual cleaver or something that we need to worry about. This Reinhardt, where is he? Yeah. Reinhardt, however, it was only a 36% chance to hit. This was also a 36% chance to hit. So it's taking it from a 40... having these shields is taking it from a 42% chance to be hit to a 36% chance to be hit. Let's get out of here. Quit. No, no, no. Stop it. Just quit. Quit means quit. Yes, thank you. Fuck off. All right, cool. So we can easily go to the calculator here and see how much of our survivability increase are we having. It's also important to note that if we shield wall, that number will drop significantly even lower. And that's a really big deal because we do have a nice backline of 6 pole arms, which means that if our front line, if for whatever reason our front line is getting kind of tore up or they're in combat with something scary, so if like a scary axeman or a scary sword, or spears are the scariest thing to fight early game. So if an undead with a spear like walks up to my shield wall, I need to do one of two things. I either need to kill him super quickly or I need to shield wall up because that plus 20% chance to hit is going to do terrible, terrible, awful, no good things. Honestly, you want to do both. You'll just shield wall the brothers that the spear guy can attack, and then you just focus it down with the back line of pitchforks. But as we can see here, it was 42%, and then 36%. I think that's a reduction of... I literally just take this and I divide it by something, right? No, I multiply. Times... I want to say 0.66666. Nope. Okay. 42 times 0.7. Okay. Interesting. 42 times 0.8. Right? Does that sound about right? Okay. Huh. 25. Okay, that's telling me 25. All right, cool. So it's telling me that the sheer act of having that shield on that brother is a 25% increase in my survivability. If I shield walled I do believe that number would double, so it would be like another plus 15 if I recall shield wall correctly. There's no shield mastery involved. The brother next to him would probably also shield wall. When you're shield walling, you're usually doing it in pairs for obvious reasons because you're scared of the thing in front of you. So usually shield walling increases it by 20. So they would go from having a 36% chance to hit you to having a 16% chance to hit you, which is insanely survivable. So the whole idea is that the enemies are only attacking you once per turn. Worst case scenario, your frontline shield walls up, and then you just let the pitchforks in the back do all the work. The fact that I'm also fighting undead and swamp is even better because if I have to, I can shield knock back somebody away, and then they can't move the hex back up and attack at all. So as you saw in that image, we had an undead with a cleaver that was kind of flanking around us. That's where the spear guy on the flank comes in, because the spear guy can do one of two things. He can either spear wall up and deny an area, or he can knock somebody back with his shield. In that rough terrain, knocking them back with a shield is just as good. So he could literally go up there and entertain that one undead for for like a good 5 rounds before he runs out of stamina. But yeah, so I have not had a starting issue with Peasant Militia. In as long as I figured out buy shields, buy butter knives, buy pitchforks when they're cheap, have a front line and a back line, and make sure for the love of God that you are fighting undead. Your first fight needs to be undead. Possibly your second fight needs to be undead. But after that, you've got the gear you need. You've got the money you need to pretty much rickroll anything in your path. So anyways, I'm going to end the video here, and Deus Vult, boys. I'll probably make a couple of other videos on this subject because there are some very unique things about this army or this army design in general. Easily the most... Damn, that's bright as hell. The most unique thing in general is that I have no mega tanks whatsoever. It's not that I don't want mega tanks in my army, like, you know, having that tool in my tool chest. It's just that every brother I found that could possibly be made into a mega tank also had high melee attack, which means he just makes the best frontline brother there is, right, for the army build. But I have a couple of saves here that I wanted to do. Ugh, autosave, bad. Like this one. This one is pretty cool because once I push the space bar, we're going to end up fighting 10 white unholds. And you might think to yourself, wait a minute, aren't the unholds just going to throw me around everywhere and make my life completely miserable? And won't this army suck against an army of like 10 unholds? The meta army build, the two-handed axe Zero-Stam meta army build, this is one of the hardest fights they can possibly encounter in the game. This army's hardest fight that they encounter is actually Ancient Undead, which is why the backline looks completely different to any backline that you would normally see. Their hardest fights are Orcs and Ancient Undead. And versus the Orcs, I have Spear Throwers that don't care, that can be actually brought to that fight and can shred armor and don't care if they get, like, you know, meleeed on. Versus Ancient Undead, they've taken the Bullseye skill, so they just keep chucking axes into the back line. And what ends up happening is by the time I've cut through the shield walling front rank of Ancient Undead, the back line is dead or just about to be dead because they've just been throwing axes constantly this entire time. Like, I literally, this army doesn't care what gets hit with a throwing axe, as long as what got hit with a throwing axe still had armor on it, is basically the TLDR there. And then, of course, with Bullseye, when I fight, like, noble armies, everybody has Fearsome and a bunch of Qatal Daggers. So you just dagger down, you just jab down the standard bearer. And then the army just starts having cascading morale issues due to all the Qatal Daggers. But against these unholds here, we have some benefits and some negatives. The benefit is I do have really durable, and I have literally I literally have dodge tank spear throwers. So even though I don't have mega tanks to tie these guys down, what ends up happening is I can still bring my throwing guys to the battle, which is awesome. It makes the fight a little crazy and a little weird, but fairly easy and one-sided affair. And then more importantly, unholds have no armor whatsoever. They just have 600 HP, and they regenerate like 10% of their HP a turn. But I have an army of Qatal Dagger bros, which means I do more damage per turn with 16 brothers than even great axes would do under these combat circumstances. So against 10, 12 unholds, this is a really scary fight for the meta build. But this army is absolutely going to shit all over it and make it look a little trivial, if not a little hilarious, as my guys get knocked around and thrown around all over the place. So I want to showcase that fight, and then I want to showcase maybe an Ancient Undead fight if I can find it, and then a few other fights. So I want to showcase what's hard for the meta build that's easy for me, and then what's easy for the meta build but that's hard for me, and then like the middle ground of the two, which would be fighting like orcs, because they're both heavily armored and they are heavily armored. Oh, and they have a lot of HP. The other fight that's really scary for the meta build, that's not really all that scary for this army whatsoever, like they literally just poop all over it, is Chosen Axemen. The reason why this army doesn't give a two sakes of a shit about Chosen Axemen is the Chosen Axemen take exactly 1 million years to... the Chosen Axemen walk up to you, see they have a 10% chance to hit you. Basically, actually it's not that. They have like a 15% chance to hit you. But they often say, fuck that, and they try to hack away your shield. Which is why I'm wearing all these incredibly thick shields on me right now. Is because I was looking for a Chosen Axeman fight, not a damn unhold fight. But they'll spend like 3 turns destroying your shield. And when they finally destroy your shield, you're still a 300 Battle-Forged Armor brother with a plus 25% damage Qatal Dagger. While at the same time you've been shredding their armor the entire time, so it's probably Qatal Dagger death time. So it's like your reward for destroying my shield, spending 3 turns destroying my shield, is you now die horribly, horribly fast. So that's kind of why it trivializes it. Otherwise, the meta build kind of struggles a little bit with Chosen Axemen. They don't struggle with it, it's just a scary fight for them. Because the Chosen Axemen will have like a 30% chance to hit their bros, and a Chosen Axeman can like 3-shot a battle brother under those conditions. It doesn't really matter what your stats are. 300 armor, Chosen Axeman will just 1, 2, 3, and your brother is just fucking dead. So that can be a scary fight for them. But when it's a 15% chance, a 12% chance to hit you, that almost never happens. And they often spend a considerable amount of time just trying to hack away at your shield. And more importantly, you have 16 battle brothers, so the odds of you blinking and your brother being killed because he got hit 3 times is incredibly low, because there's usually only 2 enemies that can attack one of your bros at a time. So usually what'll happen is you'll get bitch slapped twice and be like, ow, fuck life, and then you just start making plans for basically retreating him out of there. So again, you can do the shield wall, you know, triple quadro, whatever the hell, shield wall. It drops the chance he gets hit down to like, 5% chance, and he literally just, backs the fuck up. So you don't need any of that. But that's what I want to do eventually. In the next few videos is I'll actually show what combat looks like for the Qatal Dagger build. But after looking at all the math underneath the hood, with Peasant Militia, I got to go try a Nobel Sword build and just see if it's any good. Because I could use the plus 10% chance to hit. I already know Cleavers are going to be amazing. I just needed to investigate if Qatal Daggers would be any good. Turns out they are absolutely amazing, but you definitely need to have the Throwing Axemans help you wear down enemy armor. And I think the Sword Mastery brothers, they're going to be kind of like yeah, we would like help with armor, but honestly, we can also handle it on our own, which might change things a little bit. I really don't know. But definitely have to go play test that. Anyways, on this video here, and Deus Volt boys.